Eskom has cited increasing demand and poor maintenance of power stations as the cause of stage 4 load shedding. Is the country in trouble? Let's get more on this story with Greenstone Energy Executive chairperson Mohamed Mahdi. Thank you so much for coming through, Mohamed. So, this situation with load shedding, so they are citing a sharp spike in demand. I suppose that's got to do with the weather. And this is me just really guessing what could have happened to drive a spike in demand, but also the issue of maintenance. Why are we in 2019 still talking about maintenance, an issue that was flagged, if memory serves me well, some 3 years ago?
Look, when you have a system as complex as the power system, and you have it constrained for resources, both in terms of the number of competent people, so there are competent people, but not necessarily enough within the system, and in terms of financial resources, you're going to have and an aging fleet, both from an infrastructure, from a distribution, from a transmission and a generation perspective. You're going to have these kinds of problems, and unfortunately we have a very unstable power system in the country. So it seems as if the slightest bit of deviation, unexpected deviation like we've had now, this unusual spike, we're told, in demand, causes the system to become unstable. And the sad reality of it is that we'll have more of this going forward until the system as a whole is brought to a more stable situation. And that has got to be the priority.
In fact, as you talk about the system, take me through the numbers and the balance there on a daily basis between what we need by way of energy and then compared to what we have ordinarily. It doesn't appear to me that there's any room for error there. You simply must have the capacity you need to keep the lights on a daily basis.
Well, let's talk about percentages. I think it's easier to digest for most people. So typically you would have 10 to 15% what we call a reserve capacity and a spinning reserve in most cases. And that allows the system to be able to react very quickly to load changes up to 10 to 15%, and that's the typical sort of generation capacity that you need in most countries. Unfortunately, given the state of our system, we're not quite there. In fact, we're often dabbling below 10%. Eskom publishes these numbers every now and then, and they do vary from time to time. I seem to recall very recently that we've actually dipped even more precariously than that 10%, and this is fundamentally the problem. And it's exacerbated by the fact that maintenance is an issue, but the more systemic issue, of course, is that we have a generation fleet that is aging, and that's not always able to cope with the kind of demands that we have. And the maintenance, clouds the issue every now and then by also causing load shedding.
Yeah, and this aging fleet, that really is the kicker, isn't it, Mohamed? Because it's not like we didn't anticipate that our fleet would reach end of life at some point. Therefore, the start of whether you're talking the coal-powered stations, Medupi and Gusile, or Ingula, the reserve capacity that we were building there. But it brings into sharp focus the failure of those systems to actually augment and boost our energy mix.
So look, I think we all know about the failures, and there have been many failures. What we need to focus on right now is what do we do to fix this?
Yeah.
And it's fundamental that we put in sufficient capacity and resources to fix the problem as it currently stands, as opposed to dwelling too much on what led to here.
Yeah.
But then in parallel with that, taking the lessons of what led to here, let's also unleash the creativity, the resources within the private sector to help with this problems. And that means that regulatory issues are part of the problem in this country. It's not just the system. We need to get the regulatory regime such that we have a smoother flow of electricity and an easier provision of power by the private sector together with the national utility.
Private sector generation and selling back onto the grid, is that what you're talking about?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It's that we don't only have to sell back onto the grid. Today, it's possible to put power plants on site for industrial clients, for commercial clients, for mining clients. And, although the regulatory regime allows it, we need to make that process smoother, and we need to fast-track that process. We also need to get the financial systems in this country in place that support that.
Lastly, Mohamed, a lot of people will be looking to ways of getting off the grid. That has become the key thing, to say, if I can get myself off the grid and install solar panels, use gas and any other alternative sources. But on a larger scale for Eskom, is that really viable, given what we learned just in the last few days about the costs of these contracts, these renewable energy independent power producer contracts? When you have an Eskom that is so heavily indebted and now they are saddled with these contracts that by their own admission are just simply highly priced, is that a viable addition to the energy mix?
I think the problem is when you say with Eskom, or when you put Eskom in as part of that solution in terms of renewable energy, it becomes very difficult and it becomes very onerous on the country. When you allow the private sector to be able to do what can be done in terms of gas solar hybrids, in terms of a number of generation technologies that today can produce power cheaper than Eskom, cheaper than municipalities, allow that, unlock that, then you have a solution for the country, or you're on the road to a solution for the country.
All right, Mohamed, thank you so much for coming through and